A pleasure to say you happy 2022. Thank you for the first event Ajak is organizing this year. It's about the innovation fund. You know, soon it's the deadline for the second call for large-scale projects. So we will see the lessons learned from the first call. We have a lot of people still connecting, so we start in 2 minutes. Thank you. Okay, we have an official 2 minutes late after the official start at 2 o'clock. So thank you all for joining this webinar. So as I was mentioning in the first introduction, we will organize today an event to help geothermal project developers to make a good proposal for the second call of the Innovation Fund on large project. As you know, the European Commission launched an Innovation Fund 2 years ago. It was a follow-up of the NIR 300. It's to allow to develop demonstration project with high innovative potential. The first call was launched 2 years ago. Results have been published end of last year. Unfortunately, we have not seen any geothermal projects selected with first call on large project. There are many reasons, and we will see the lessons learned from that. But we have to remind to all of you with geothermal, there's a lot of possibilities. We are able to produce electricity, heating, cooling, notably at high temperature for decarbonizing also the industry, to extract minerals like lithium. So there's a lot of possibility with combined heat and power, large heat pump, district heating. Many technologies can be combined together for full system integration with geothermal. I present you now the agenda of today. So we have a pleasure to have Ugo Simeoni, which is project manager at CINEA. CINEA is the European agency in charge of managing the Innovation Fund. So we will listen to him and learn a lot about what have been the details of the first call and what are also, from the point of view of the European Commission, the first lessons learned. Then we go a bit more into the detail of geothermal, and we give the floor to Marco Barresi from Turboden. He's working at Turboden. He's also the vice president of Ajak, and on behalf of Ajak, he was also an expert in the Innovation Fund expert group. So it's good to also to listen to Marco to have his view, because he has a full picture of the Innovation Fund, but also as a technical expert in geothermal. We have a pleasure also to have 2 case studies presented. So about potential project for the Innovation Fund. First, from Ever, my pleasure to have Bailey Schwartz, and from Cleag, we will have Bodo van During. Then we give you the possibility for a Q&A discussion with Ugo, Marco, Bailey, and Bodo. And we will conclude the event on the presentation of the second call. I tell you the second call was already published. The deadline is in less than 1 month, or a bit more than 1 month, sorry. And Thomas Garavetian from Ajak will present you the second call. And we will end with some recommendation from Sanjeev Kumar, our head of policy at Ajak. I'm now giving the floor to Ugo for the first lessons learned. And I just remind you that the year 2022 is the second year of the geothermal decade. Thank you for attention, and I wish you a good event. Ugo, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Philippe. I will now share my screen. Okay. Hope you can see my presentation now.
I confirm everything is fine.
Okay. So This one. Okay. So good afternoon, everyone, and really thanks a lot for the invitation on behalf of CINEA. I'm Ugo Simeoni. I work as a project manager in the renewables and energy storage sector of the Innovation Fund unit at CINEA, the Climate Infrastructure and Environment Executive Agency of the European Commission. Today I'm here to basically give you some introduction about the Innovation Fund and also share with you the results of the first small scale and large scale call and introduce you the lesson learned for the large scale call and the 2021 large scale call, and finally to give you some tips and some supports on how to prepare a good proposal. So okay, so I guess many of you already have heard about the Innovation Fund, at least I hope so. But what it is, the Innovation Fund in a nutshell? So basically, it focuses on highly innovative technologies and big flagship projects within Europe that can bring on significant greenhouse gas emissions reduction. So it is about scaling up the clean technology, sharing the risks with project promoters to help with the demonstration of first of a kind, highly innovative projects. We have at the moment 4 thematic areas under which the projects can be categorized. The first one is the production and use of renewable energy, including manufacturing plants for components. Then we have the carbon capture, use and storage, the energy intensive industries, including substitute products, and finally the energy storage, including manufacturing plants for components. What are the key features of the Innovation Fund? So the program is financed from the revenues from the EU emission trading systems, and the volume it depends on the carbon price. So when this was set up in 2020, we had a carbon price of 50 euro per tons of CO2, and the volume was then of 25 billion euro of the program until 2030. We have already set up 2 calls, and then we will schedule annual calls for large-scale projects whose capex are above 7.5 million, and for small-scale projects with a capex below 7.5 million. The large-scale projects will receive supports of up to 60% of additional capital and operating costs up to 10 years, so with 10 operational years, and the small projects instead supports of up to 60% of additional capitals for up to 3 years. Up to 40% of grant will be disbursed at financial close or before, and at least 60% of grant disbursed after the financial close and during the operational period will be disbursed against the greenhouse gas emission avoidance. The projects may have only one single applicant or a consortium, but must be implemented in the EU, in Norway or Iceland. And there is also the possibility to have project development assistance provided by the European Investment Bank. So here you can see the results of the first call. For large-scale projects, we had a grant of about 1,145 million for 7 projects, with project development assistance for 15 projects, while for the small-scale call, we had grant of 109 million for 30 projects, and 10 projects went for project development assistance. To give you now more details about the small scale. So the small scale projects in the first call, 232 projects were submitted, of which 175 proposals were deemed admissible and eligible, and only 37 proposals passed all the thresholds, and then finally 30 proposals successfully signed the grant agreement, as I was saying, with a total of 109 million euro. Here you can see on the map where the projects are going to be implemented. In green, there are the projects that have signed the grant agreement, the 30 projects. yeah, you may see that probably the number of symbols doesn't really correspond with the number of projects, because some of the projects are implemented in more than one member state. While in blue, you see the projects awarded for project development assistance. With regards to the renewable heating and cooling, these are the results for the small scale. We have one project, which is CCGEO on closed carbon geothermal energy. The project aims to produce near zero carbon power and heat from gas dissolved in water extracted from geothermal wells, and it will be implemented in Croatia. Another project named Water Horizon will develop at commercial scale an innovative thermal storage technology, what they call the mobile thermal battery, and will be implemented in France. And a third project called Decarbomalt, renewable heat for large-scale decarbonization of the malt production process in Croatia. The project will build a solar thermal heating plant, heat pumps, and a storage facility to provide renewable heat to an energy-intensive malt production process in Croatia. I have put here the link. I will share the presentation to also project fishes, so you can get more information later on. I will share the presentation with the Secretariat. With regards instead to large-scale projects, on the first call, we had 311 projects submitted. 70 projects were invited to the second stage, and 66 only projects submitted to proposal to the second stage, and finally 7 were recommended for funding. And these 7 projects, so the grant agreement has not been signed yet, so we are currently in grant agreement preparation phase. The total 7 projects have a potential to avoid 72.8 million tons of CO2 equivalent over the first 10 years of operation. And here you can see also the map for the 7 large-scale projects. Also, again, in green, the one pre-selected for grant agreement preparation, and in blue, the project awarded for project development assistance. More details about this first-of-a-kind large-scale projects. One is the Kairos at sea, which is on carbon capture from hydrogen, ammonia, and ethylene oxide production and storage in the North Sea. The second one is BECCS, which is bioenergy carbon capture at combined heat and power plant and storage in the North Sea. So here we have also component of district heating. Then the K6 is a CCUS at cement plant with storage in North Sea and carbon use of concrete production. The SHARK project is on green hydrogen from water electrolysis and blue hydrogen with CCS. Then hybrid on hydrogen-based direct reduction for steel making, including also the installation of an electrolyzer. And Ecoplanta, bio-based methanol from non-recyclable municipal waste. And finally, the Tango, which is about scaling up the production of bifacial heterojunction photovoltaic cell at gigawatt scale. So what are the lessons learned? So here, exactly, I try to summarize and give you more information about the renewable heating and cooling projects that have been submitted under the first stage call. We had 12 proposals submitted on renewable heating and cooling and geothermal. 8 proposals with a maturity score very low, so it's below 2.6. Of which 2 with manifest errors. And then finally, 2 proposals were submitted to the second stage. This is very in line with also what happened with projects in the other topics. So the maturity, I think it's maturity criteria is, I think, a critical criteria that many of the projects didn't reach yet. And therefore, you see that the score is lower than the one for the other criteria. And therefore, also in this presentation, I try to put together some useful lesson learned with regards to the award criteria that are the most difficult one, let's say, to have a higher score. One is the degree of innovation, which we say is be exhaustive and underpin your claims with evidence. So what have we seen is that you have to compare basically the proposed innovation with also all the other technologies on the market. So establish the relevant state of the art in a clear and comprehensive market. So which means that we also are expecting that you provide performance data, cost, production characteristics, and also product characteristics or technology system and readiness level. We expect that you provide details why the innovation goes beyond the incremental innovation. So what are the barriers for scaling up innovative technologies, the barriers for combining innovative technologies, and also that you provide key performance data via feasibility studies and other documentation, so that yeah, it is also for the external experts, it is easier and more clear actually to identify what kind of innovation you're proposing and why this goes beyond the state of the art. Here you can see the main mistakes that have been actually we have spotted on greenhouse gas emission avoidance. So what happens is that many projects claim additional greenhouse gas emission savings or negative emissions, but however, these were not really underpinned by robust calculations. So the recommendation is always make sure the claims and numbers add up. So ensure that the calculation and reportings are aligned with the methodologies. So the first thing is to identify the principal product, select the correct sector accordingly, the reference scenario, and then applicable methodology section. Make sure that the correct emission factor is used and applied to the project in line with the methodology. And any deviation from the project boundary or the methods should be justified and documented. So as last, assumptions have to be robust and properly justified. And then, of course, some best practices on project maturity, which is one of these is definitely to identify technical risk, financial and operational risk, have a comprehensive risk assessment, develop a mitigation strategy that in all the areas, both technical, financial, operational, define a project timeline which is comprehensive, realistic, and with the project's technical and financial element. And then last but not least would be provide contractual evidence for takeoff agreements, key suppliers, EPC partners. It's really a letter of support or memorandum of understanding are really documents that can prove that there is also already an agreement with end users or other parties, suppliers that will basically contribute to the development and to the successful realization of the project. Then here some information about the open call. So now there is the second scale call, which has been launched on 26th of October 2021 with the deadline on the 3rd of March. The results will be out on the third quarter of 2022. The grant is about 1.5 billion plus the project development assistance, as the same scope as the large scale call of 2020. So innovative projects close to the market, and also the award criteria are the same. There are few changes that I will show you later in slides, but the 5 main award criteria remains. So one is the greenhouse gas emission avoidance, including net carbon removals and other greenhouse gas savings, the degree of innovation, the project maturity, cost efficiency, and scalability. And with regards to the grant distribution, this is still a lump sum contribution, which means that the grants will be disbursed just upon the completion of the work packages activities. The grant is covering 60% of additional capital and operating costs and up to 40% of grant at financial close. Here you can see the relevant documents. So read carefully. This is our suggestion, the call for proposal, the Annex B, which is the methodology for relevant cost calculation, and the Annex C, which is the methodology for greenhouse gas emission calculation. Then you see the application form and the model grant agreement, which is our template for the grant agreement that in case project will be invited to sign it. About the selection procedure. So here is shown all the steps. The first step is the eligibility and admissibility of the proposal. Then the external evaluators will carry out evaluations based on the award criteria that I have shown you before. The list of pre-selected projects will be consulted with member state, and then finally there will be award of project grants, or following the European Investment Assessment award of project development assistance. So just before I mentioned you the small changes, that minimal adaptation with respect to 2020. So basically what we have done is there is a new scoring rule with regards to absolute emission avoidance. The calculation points for this absolute emission avoidance are based on the median emission in the sector rather than on the best in the sector as it was before. Then new sectors have been added, so better targeted to size of projects. One is the manufacturing of components for production of renewable energy and energy storage. And the second one is the use of renewable energy outside Annex 1. And then new sub-criterion for a more comprehensive assessment, like the quality of the calculation, the net carbon removals, or other greenhouse gas emission savings. Yeah. So how the evaluation is carried out by the external expert? This is a cascade approach. There is first, they assess the degree of innovation criteria. If the score is below the threshold, then the evaluation is stopped. So then the second step is the project maturity and greenhouse gas emission avoidance criteria. So if all requirements are not met or the score is below the threshold, again, the evaluation is stopped. And then the last step is to assess the scalability and cost efficiency criteria. Also, I mentioned you earlier that this is a lump sum. The payment is done based upon the completed work packages. You see here that we have up to 40% up to financial close, or before I say this is possible to agree payments at justified milestones, for example, for drilling with geothermal projects. And then the remaining, so at least 60%, is after the financial close, but this is depending on achieved emission avoidance. So during the 10 years of operation, the coordinator, the project has to show that effectively at least 75% of the emission avoidance that are reached, and the disbursement will be done based on this proof. And then finally, how to prepare the proposal. Some of the recommendation, just start early to prepare your application and make sure that to have all the supporting documents ready on time, in particular for the third-party verification of the greenhouse gas emission calculation and the audit statement on the relevant cost. Please read carefully all the requirements for the admissibility and eligibility one in the core text. Get familiar with the methodology and the guidance for the greenhouse gas emission and the relevant cost. Check whether your project fulfills all the requirements of the call. And of course, do not wait till the last minute to submit, as the system may have some bugs. And before submitting, please check the consistency between different parts and the documents of your application. And if there is any question, you can still submit or ask a question to the help desk. And here, because the slide will be circulated, I just put some links with the past events. There are also recorded sessions and slides available. And a summary of the next call. So beside the one that is open, there will be a small scale call. As I said, the capex below 7.5 million euro, expected to be launched on the 31st of March and open till the 31st of August 2022, with expected results in the first quarter of 2023 and the volume of 100 million euro. And then in the fall of 2022, we will have another call for large-scale projects. So here are also, again, some links where to find all the information about the Innovation Fund and websites. And I think that's it. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Hugo. It was a fantastic overview of what we wanted to know from SENA. So thank you very much, Hugo. Indeed, a lot of information. Indeed, the slides will be available because you will need to probably see them again. So thank you, Hugo. I'm sure many of you have already some questions, so you can put them in the chat, in the questions, or, you know, we will have a Q&A oral sessions where we'll open the floor for you and give open your mic for oral questions. Me, I've already on one, so maybe Hugo, you could think about that. Is that you are saying some people are mentioning negative emissions, but indeed we see sometimes the issue not only in Innovation Fund, but in many programs. When you put electricity project, you connect to the grid. When you put hydrogen, you put that in the grid. When you have a heating project, a combined heat and power district heating, you automatically replace a fossil fuel. You don't run two heating systems in the same time. So you have an automatic fossil fuel avoidance. But let's think how we can treat that properly. And now I'm giving the floor to Marco Barresi, which will present here a bit more focus on geothermal expertise for the Innovation Fund. Marco, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Philippe. Ajak, good afternoon to everyone. Ajak is representing in the Innovation Fund expert group since 2018, and I believe is a relevant framework helping to reach the Green Deal targets and the strong opportunity to push innovation investment. I have a few general comments related to the first call, and also few general comments related to the criteria. I have a couple of slides if I have the possibility to share. I don't know. Okay, thank you. Okay. In principle, a very general comment. 7 projects approved, 65 eligible, more than 300 presented. It means more or less 2% success rate. In my personal opinion, is the success rate for this framework is too low. Moreover, no pre-selected nor PDA project development assistance proposal covering the geothermal sector, despite the project submitted. We heard before that 2 projects were submitted in the second stage. So it means, as general lesson, that we have a lot of work to do as Ajak, but also there are some barriers to overcome for geothermal. In principle is a complex call from the technical, financial. We need technical, financial background, and also familiarity with EU grants. The feedback we received from the associated in Ajak is that the procedure requires the mobilization of too much resources by several of our members for geothermal projects. The question for you, Hugo, is there a way for this project to be brought forward, or maybe under PDA could be an option, for example? The comments related to the other comments related to the criteria. I have a few comments. The 5 criteria concerning the GHG emission avoidance potential seems to be quite clear for geothermal projects. We have seen in the new methodology for the second call, there are some new sub-criterion, quality and credibility of the calculation, and potential to deliver net carbon removals and other GHG savings. An interesting highlight from my point of view is the pre-selected proposals add absolute avoided GHG emissions that range from around 4 million tons to 20 million tons CO2, with an average around 10 million tons CO2 equivalent. So we have to consider this data for geothermal project. Concerning degree of innovation, the Innovation Fund aims to support technologies that are not yet commercially available, but represent breakthrough solutions or are sufficiently mature to be ready for demonstration at pre-commercial scale. The evaluation is based in these 2 criteria: innovation in relation to the state of the art and contribution to further EU policy objectives. The feedback we received is that there is not enough guidelines. There are not enough guidelines related to geothermal, so it was difficult for the associated to develop. An interesting highlight also in this case is that most pre-selected proposals achieved a very high score on their contribution to EU policy, and there is a large overlap in the distribution of advancement over the state-of-the-art criteria across all the eligible proposals. Concerning the project maturity, one of the main objectives of the fund is to support large-scale demonstration and first-of-the-kind commercial innovative projects, to contribute towards removing remaining technological and financial risk. The award criteria for that is, for the project maturity, is to demonstrate credible planning, business model, and financial and legal structure, as well as of prospect of reaching the financial close in the 4 years after the award decision. Concerning the technical maturity, this topic is key for geothermal. Drilling, for example, and assessment of the resource is quite complex, time-consuming, and the result is not guaranteed. But another key issue is the financial maturity for geothermal is strongly connected with regulatory framework. The feedback we received is there is not enough connection and influence on single member states. So we know a project, for example, in Croatia, approved on the former NER 300 that still wait for the regulatory framework to sign the PPA. This aspect affect the duration of the project and financial maturity too. The highlight, an interesting highlight, is this criterion in which pre-selected proposal received the lowest point compared to the other criteria. So financial maturity is key not only for geothermal, but also for other projects. Scalability, the Innovation Fund aims to select project with technical and market potential for widespread application or replication, or for future cost reduction. The feedback for this criteria is for large and capitalized operators active in other more traditional sectors. In some ways is easier to justify this criteria, less for geothermal. Moreover, the connection with the regulatory framework, as explained before, for example, for PPA or for permits for exploration, is another crucial point to demonstrate replicability. So, summarizing the general and the punctual aspect, we have the success rate is too low, and no geothermal projects nor PDA approved pre-selected. The mobilization of too much resources is required for this kind of project for geothermal, so the possible role for PDA. The clear innovation is not enough explained, is not enough available for geothermal guidelines. Concerning financial maturity, is strongly connected with the regulation, and in our opinion, there is not enough connection with member states. Last, concerning scalability, is easier for operators in more traditional sector, capitalized, less for geothermal. That's all from my side. Thank you. I leave the floor to the operator. I am very curious to hear the lesson learned and to contribute for the discussion after. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marco, for this input. Indeed, good inputs, and I'm sure it will help us to better understand how to make better project for the second call. But let's come back to some questions you highlight maybe in the Q&A. It's my pleasure now to give the floor to Bailey Schwartz from Ever to present the case studies from Ever. So Bailey, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Philippe, and thank you to Ajak for inviting me to speak today. Really looking forward to sharing what we learned from going through the both stages of the first call with the geothermal community. So I'm just going to share my screen here. Okay. So I think Hugo and Marco did a great job talking about a lot of the lessons learned already. So I'm going to focus more today on the observations specific to our project as we were developing it, and where we found, you know, the most time had to be spent between reviewing the call methodology, reviewing all the supporting documents and FAQ, the frequently asked questions online. So I'll start off with some general observations about the call in you know, overall kind of strategy, and then and then take a look at the evaluation criteria, some basic lessons learned for each of the different scoring criteria, and speak as well to appointing the external auditor. That was a big area of focus for us. Sorry, I'm just running into an issue on my slide here. I might just present. There we go. Okay, so I think in general the process was very well laid out. There's so much information in those call guidelines and online and through the webinars that the Innovation Fund hosted. So there is such a wealth of information available. It is quite straightforward, but there is a significant amount of work involved. So what we found is we say a dedicated team here for 2 to 3 months prior to submission. I think the better approach is, you know, start thinking very early about when you're going to be applying into the fund, and make sure that you're reviewing, you know, all the call guidelines and the requirements early, to make sure that as you're developing the project, you're kind of building out these plans to support, rather than trying to put them all together as the application deadline is approaching. you know, there's for those who have looked on the call guidelines, feasibility study, project execution plan, a business plan that all kind of funnel into the application form B, and then the worksheets, the relevant costs, and the GHG worksheet as well. So just a lot of detail that's being asked for. That I think as you're developing these projects, it's there. It's just packaging it up neatly and concisely, because there's some page constraints as well to make sure that you're adhering to. I think in general, and we've already seen this in the presentation, projects past the grant funding thresholds in this first call that just weren't funded because the money wasn't available. So I'm very hopeful that in this second stage call, and the fact that it's being carried out very shortly after the first call, is a great opportunity for those projects who did make it through the first round but just didn't receive funding to move quickly through that process again. In our case, we did make it through both the first and second stages and met all the criteria required, and it was just falling kind of below that eligible funding bucket. So really key, and I think key advice for anyone who's seeking to put an application in is looking for the external auditors, so having the relevant cost worksheet and the GHG emissions reduction worksheet audited. We found that there's not many groups that are familiar with the fund and specialize in doing this. So what we would recommend to others would be try and secure who you're going to be getting to do those audits as early as possible, just to make sure that they have resource availability, they're not getting booked up, and figure out how you can fit into their schedule. Really what happens is, in our case, what happened is we met our auditors, kind of worked through the process of what they would be looking for. And then as we completed our application, we set aside, a few week period at the end between finishing all our documents and having the application deadline to do that external audit of the application. And really they're looking for, validating the assumptions that are used, making sure the methodology is being adhered to. On the relevant cost side, this one was a bit more challenging than the GHG worksheet. In our case, we had a few groups who initially said that they could perform the audit, but then when reviewing the guidelines, came back and said they weren't sure that they were qualified or what the deliverables were, and weren't comfortable issuing an audit statement. So we were able to work through that. That took some time preparing for the last call, or the second stage call. So I think just in general, review that, make sure you're working with someone early to make sure that everyone's aligned on what the deliverables are. And then I think for the Innovation Fund, future consideration is if there is a template for what's expected in that audit report, it would really simplify that process, and maybe more clear qualifications on what the auditors needed to have as qualifications. In terms of the evaluation criteria, the GHG emissions avoidance worksheet is straightforward. There's lots of description on how to do that, making sure you're picking the right reference case and the right comparators, and having good assumptions in there that are defensible was really key. And then I think looking at kind of the operating period that you're selecting and understanding kind of where because you're really benchmarking those emissions for the 10-year period. So there's not really much to explain here. I think it's very, very clear in the guidelines. It's just take some time and make sure that you're working through that. There are the new tabs that have been added, kind of broken out, as Hugo alluded to, in the worksheet for different ways that you can do carbon capture and things like that too, to take a look at, not relevant for our project. And then in terms of degree of innovation, this is that innovative compared to the state of the art, and then going beyond incremental innovations, really looking at game-changing technologies that are going to change the landscape for renewable electricity, renewable heat. So in this case, we scored very well with what we're proposing. So this is our Barresi project in Germany, the first commercial demonstration of our closed loop Everloop technology. So we did I think have a very strong case here, and saw the results and the feedback from the commission. Project maturity was a heavy lift. It's quite a large section, and there's a lot of detail that they're looking for. I think in terms of technical maturity, in our case, we were really able to leverage the success of our Everlight pilot projects, the project that we've got operating in Canada that's been running for 2 years, using that operational data and showcasing those results to support, you know, the plans for the now scaling up to the commercial implementation. So if you do have kind of that supporting reference project, I'd certainly recommend to include that data to strengthen the technical maturity section. From an operational perspective, when we put our application in, we had quite an aggressive development schedule, showing that we were committed to spending our equity first and accelerating construction as soon as possible. And I think from my perspective, as well as, you know, our team was discussing the approach here, we thought that the perception of that would be, you know, that we're committed to moving this project forward, and kind of strengthen the view of how mature the project was. I think when we reviewed the feedback received, in general, it was just the timeline was too optimistic. So I think if people are kind of on the fence and looking at how to put that execution plan together, it may be better to be conservative in the project scheduling and kind of align to, you know, give some more buffer time between awarding of the grant, financial close, and then commencing construction activities, you know, based on that feedback. And the one other thing I'll mention on operational is this ties into your project execution plan. There's quite a big section on like the work packages, how to structure those, how to line up the deliverables and the milestones associated. That took some time to work through for us in the last call. But I do know that now Annex F has been updated in the call guidelines. There's a lot more description on how to approach this section. So I recommend that people would take a look at that new annex as well, to help inform how that section needs to be drafted. A lot of the learnings for us were on the financial project maturity. So for the financial model summary sheet, we had our own financial model for the project, and transferring information from our model into the simplified kind of financial model summary sheet that was provided as a template took some time just to make sure inputs were flowing in correctly. I say here no clear directions on how to properly input into the sheet. There were examples, but I think maybe just a bit of a narrative on how to treat certain elements like the grants would have helped us save us a bit of time, because it did take quite a bit of time to work through that. The other thing that we found, and I think they've clarified just in the you know, best practices and lessons learned from stage 1, is that when you're going through the guidelines, they say to try not to change the templates as much as possible, so it's easier for the reviewers to make sure they're going through and doing an apples to apples comparison. And so in our case, when we were looking at the financial model summary sheet, the project life was actually truncated. I think it was 20 or 25 years versus the 30-year project life that we were modeling out. And so we needed to extend the timeline to match the project life. So we just made that change the last call. But it seems like some other people ran into that same challenge and didn't make that adjustment. So it was clarified that now the expectation is that you're adjusting that model timeline to match the project life, and make sure that you're getting consistency in the financial outcomes when you're doing that. The relevant cost worksheet, I think a key learning for geothermal, especially if there's people doing combined heat and power projects, was that for our case, the multiple product functionality that's built into that sheet had some issues for heat and power projects. So there's kind of a table at the top where you can put in your capacities and your reference prices per product. But then there's kind of a single set of parameters that you input through the rest of the sheet. Things like state aid subsidies and variable OPEX, and those aren't the same for your two products. For example, your OPEX is going to be higher for power if you're running an organic Rankine cycle than a direct heat use. For the state aid subsidies we're developing in Germany, so there's an EEG tariff for electricity, whereas there's not a subsidy for heat. So trying to figure out how to really make the sheet work for us without having to do too much adjustment into the calculations that flow through we thought about different approaches here, and what we ended up doing was just kind of building out the same relevant cost worksheet for electricity and for heat, and then doing a weighted average calculation based on the total thermal output of our project on an annual basis, how much was going to heat, how much was going to power. We reviewed that with our auditors, so we're looking at the relevant cost worksheet as well, and they said that that was sound methodology, and didn't receive any negative feedback through the fund that wasn't going to be accepted. So yeah, that's for any combined heat and power projects, that was a change, and that might be something for the commission to think about as well for future, if there's just, you know, maybe a constant set of outputs, or two outputs for each product that's being inputted there on the multiple inputs option, or multiple products option. And then just in general, I think most people probably encountered this, but financial commitments, so trying to have really strong financial maturity when everything is conditional on grant funding. We had a lot of discussions with equity, with debt, where, you know, it's just hard to make a lot of progress until that line of sight to having a grant is there. So it's a bit of a chicken and an egg situation. We're working through that, but again, just in general, a challenge on the financial maturity. And I think that is why most of the lower scores, even with the projects that were funded, came through in the maturity section. Scalability, in our case, we were able to point to a very large project pipeline, both in the project itself, it's part of a first phase of a larger scale development, and then a portfolio of projects in Europe and other parts of the world. So this is also kind of where it ties into the EU policy objectives. Key there, and I think key feedback that we're working on right now, is making sure that there are measurable claims, that it's not just kind of general statements in terms of how your projects will, you know, adhere to the intent of those policies. And then finally, cost efficiency ratio. So it is a very straightforward calculation. A few things that we've kind of thought about to try and increase the score. You basically got your grant, the requested amount, your grant that you're looking for versus the absolute GHG emissions avoidance. So obviously, to improve the score, you can either reduce the amount of grant or increase your GHG emissions avoidance. There's a few ways that you can tackle this. Looking at modifying project capital, changing the scale of your project. I know that was a big discussion for us, is trying to make sure we weren't kind of asking for more money. I think in hindsight, looking back at the projects that were awarded, they were very large, and large scale, large capital. So I don't think that should really inform how you're structuring the project, but something to think about as you're putting these project applications together. So yeah, thank you very much. That's my presentation, and I will hand it back to Philippe.
Thank you, Bailey. Indeed, a lot of good inputs, and I'm sure it triggers some questions for the Q&A session that we will have just after the second presentation of the case studies. Bodo, wondering from Clegg with a project in Croatia. Bodo, can you connect?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you. Perfect, floor is yours.
So yeah, thank you. Philippe, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. We can see your webcam with your screen, but not the presentation.
Yeah, we haven't got a presentation because we decided there's nothing to show in writing. And we first want to thank Hugo for the news we learned that from the 40% upfront payment, you can finance drilling costs with something we have never seen before. And I think if it's improved, we think it's very good, because that's the most important thing for geothermal project. We also applied for the small scale, and we got a small scale Innovation Fund award and signed the grant agreement. So we are very grateful for that. And nevertheless, I can support what Bailey Schwartz said concerning the application process. And we have a suggestion also, because we find the greenhouse gas avoidance measure really very attractive, and that's basically what we think the Innovation Fund should be for. And what we don't see is the connection between such a greenhouse gas avoidance and a possible PPA. At the moment, we have gone through everything with our pilot project, which was NER 300 funded, and we're still waiting for a PPA from the member state. And that's something I think where Ajak should become active. Any energy project becomes only bankable if you can sign a PPA. And we suggest that the greenhouse gas avoidance measure that the Innovation Fund introduced now should become a base for a possible PPA with a member state. In the meantime, the energy prices have moved tremendously, so that it may be that in the future we'll be able to do private PPAs. Nevertheless, so far only state PPAs, and PPAs for 10 years have been admissible by the banks. And I think that's a big field of action for Ajak and also for the EU to align the member states and the policies of the EU. There is no point in having grants out that cannot be used because the member states don't issue PPAs, especially when they have a monopoly for the energy purchase and energy trade. That is something we would like to recommend, and hope that there will be action pretty soon, that we come to a state where we can sign a conditional PPA for a new project that is conditional to receiving the necessary building permits and energy production permits in the member state. That is all we wanted to mention to this, and we thank you very much for your efforts, and we believe it's a very good way to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Bodo. I ask you to stay with us because now we have a Q&A session, so maybe we can ask all presenters, Hugo, Marco, Bailey, to switch on again their webcam. I don't know if you have first some reactions on what has been said. I don't know, Marco or Hugo, because you have a first presenters.
I don't know, Hugo, have you seen, for example, I mentioned at the beginning that there was nor PDA or nor geothermal approved in this session. So, and in principle, is a low success rate for renewable project. So the question is how we can improve for example, using PDA, or in principle, how can improve the success rate for geothermal, for example?
Well, I think in general, you know, we also have analyzed a bit of the applications received and so on, and on several aspects. So, okay, starting from the PDA, let's say that this depends on the projects. So it is not because I understand that as you were mentioning, Marco, many members, many stakeholders from the geothermal sector had to mobilize many resources for this. But then it depends if the business case finally it was completed or not, if it was a very good business case, if the project was mature enough. And so if the reason is because the business case is not completed, then this could be assisted by the PDA. But if the reason is because the project is not mature enough, then this is not really the case. So we have to distinguish, and we have to understand if the project that we propose is really mature, if it proposes an innovative technologies that goes beyond the state of the art, that there are not so many developments in terms of research activities needed, because this could also be something that has not been considered. So on the other side, if we look at renewable projects in general, I think we have run some analysis, and we saw that actually there was quite a fair distribution in terms of thematic areas, the ones that I presented at the beginning. So there are projects that, okay, they are more focused in some cases on CCUS, and other cases on hydrogen, or for example, we have the Tango projects on the production of solar PV cells. But overall, we analyzed a bit the project, and we saw that 40 projects passed on the 48 projects that passed the evaluation on the second stage. About 10 were related to renewable energy production. So had this kind of component in it. So if we look at the 4 thematic areas, we think that this is fair. So it means, of course, one project may have more than one component in it, but that's what we are also analyzing. I think, yeah, so there were many questions before, but I hope that already started to answer to some. So with regards for example, Bodo was mentioning about the member states' connection with the EU. This is already, as I showed also in the slide, this is a step that it is also done, because the list of pre-selected projects are consulted with the member states, and also the agency, but as well as DG Klima, the Commission, are in contact with member states. The member states can advise and assist also the Commission with regards setting general orientation for the innovation funds, or as well as addressing problems or problems related to the implementation, for example, of a project. So we cooperate also a lot, for example, with the national contact points. So there is already this connection. But of course, I mean, everything that you mentioned, I'm taking with me, Tom, and discuss it internally.
Thank you very much. I think it's really important. As you know, we are waiting 7 years now for the tariff, and
of course, I mean, what the message I wanted to pass is that we really encourage more projects proposal from the geothermal sector to be submitted, because yeah, I think the case of Ivor is a case which the project was successful. Then of course the budget was limited. We had an extraordinary amount of proposals submitted for the first call. We didn't expect so many, but but indeed, so the budget available was more than a billion. So in the first call, that's why we couldn't fund all the projects that passed the threshold. There were also some other sectors that were somehow maybe not in scoring between the first 7, but this means that we are expecting this project to be resubmitted again, and of course with their experience that they've already gained, and we hope that this will be funded. Of course, as you know, this is not up to CINEA. There will be external evaluators, so evaluating financial aspects, but as well as technical aspects. So finally, from our side, we really hope to see more geothermal proposal and projects then finally being awarded.
Can I ask you something about the external evaluators?
Sure.
Yeah, so external evaluators are specialists, and they have an advantage. That's an advantage that they're specialized, and the disadvantage they have is that they are old knowledge. So you are absolutely lost if you come with an innovation, because it's something they're not specialized in, because it's new. And I think that's something would be very good to think about, how to improve that situation. Because I think we all want innovation, and that's the big challenge you have with an innovation.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we have more than we have several experts evaluating one proposals, you know, both on technical aspects and financial aspects. So we believe that it is well covered, but then of course, I mean, there is always room for improvement.
Yeah,
for sure. We have a question to Bailey. So indeed, you have applied to the first call. With the lessons learned you have, you still consider that the Innovation Fund is a good opportunity for funding innovation like yours, or for either? Is it still a good opportunity for funding projects with this tool?
Yes, I think absolutely. We're you know, marching down the road of preparing everything for resubmission, and it's a great program to try and promote these, you know, game-changing innovations. And I think unfortunately, you know, the budget wasn't there in the first round, but we have full intention to make use of the fund. And I think as I review, you know, all the objectives of the innovation fund against what our objectives are, there's so much alignment there that it just naturally, it's a great fit. So yeah, I think it's a really significant program that's going to be helping to commercialize these new game-changing technologies.
Thank you. Marco?
Yes. Yes, I have a question for Ugo. We understand from your presentation that 8 proposals from geothermal and renewable heating and cooling, the maturity score low, because you mentioned 2.6. It seems low. What recommendation would you give project developer bringing forward geothermal project? What specific criteria they should focus on for this next stage?
Well, the maturity is the score that I showed was related to maturity in general, so both the technical, financial, and operational maturity. So these are all connected somehow, but it's true that I mean we are talking about, as I mentioned at the beginning, projects that are ready to take off, that maybe are strategic investments for the companies, that they already invest on it, and they are looking for this additional step or funding that is needed to complete and to bring the technology to the commercialization. So, and that's a key. That's also what we see in all the other projects that have been funded. and also enable that this is a strategic project. The company is ready to also implement these projects. In some cases, the projects already started before, also with the innovation funds. This is also the cases for some of the project, the 7 projects. So that's the main recommendation is really to look also at in terms of financial model, the financial model, financial maturity, that there is also, as we say, that some, for example, end users already, for example, able to be engaged and use the technology, and that there is a business case which is consistent and solid.
Thank you.
Thank you, Hugo. Indeed, we will have to work together as stakeholders and you as a funding agency to have a better success rate, because indeed it was quite low in the first call. Maybe this year is too late because the second call is still ongoing, but as you mentioned, it will be every year. And looking at good practices also from other programs, but also from ILA300, the consideration of a geographical coverage, the consideration of subcategories, the consideration of different thresholds, because indeed you mentioned that large projects are more than 7.5 million, but if you divide the total budget 1.1 billion with the number of projects of 7 projects, we speak about quite more than 100 million. No? So indeed the threshold is 7.5, but you provide funding to more than 1 million. So maybe there's a way also to have different additional criteria, no?
So we have the category for those projects. I mean, one is the small scale, in which the capex are below 7.5 million, and the other one is the large scale, in which the capex are above 7.5 million. But then there is no.
It's why maybe we could think together if it will not be worth to have different other thresholds categories. It's for the third, for the fourth, for the fifth call. Maybe it will be some brainstorming for the future. I thank you all for your answers. Yeah, for sure, Bailey.
For Hugo, actually, it's so something that, I mean, I think the intent of the fund is to maximize the impact of the dollars that are distributed in terms of seeing that impact on the CO2 emissions reductions or the GHG emissions reductions. The way that the scoring is currently set up looks only at the project that's within the scope of the application for that 10-year operating window. And I'm just wondering if any thought has been put into, or may be considered in the future, really that scalability element tying in as well. So potentially looking at weighting that category as the standalone project within the scope as a portion of it, and then the scalability, you know, if there's tangible next projects that there are letters of intent, there's meaningful progress on that could then feed in. And even within that 10-year period, I know in our case, there's a lot of interest to have fast following subsequent projects that are all kind of waiting on demonstration at this first site. But what that does is it basically takes the dollars that are contributed for the one project, and the cost efficiency, you know, changes dramatically as soon as you start layering in project 2, 3, and 4, or even future development on that project location. So I know it's already somewhat kind of included in the scalability portion itself, but that might be something to think about, or for your consideration, if there is a way to weave that into the cost efficiency as well, because I know that was something that we were, you know, trying to illustrate as much as we could in the application that we put forward.
Yeah, definitely this will be, but as you have seen, you know, a few compared to the first call, a few things have changed. And these have been changed based on the feedback that we received. So definitely I will take this on board. Just look at now, the first score is the degree of innovation, and then there will be this cascade approach. So yeah, I think, you know, the few things that have been modified are exactly based on the feedback from the applicants. So we hope that also with the time we are going to fine tune these things. So
okay, thank you.
Thank you, Hugo and Bailey, Marco, and Bodo for indeed this interesting discussion. We are about to have a last session of the event with focus on the more information for the second code, and after some recommendations. So I will now give the floor to Thomas Garabetian to present a bit some detail for the geothermal part of the second code. Thomas, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Philippe. Thank you all for this great conversation. I mean, I think I'm not going to be adding that much to what was already said, because we already had a very good overview of what I wanted to convey now by discussing the second code. So it is not really possible to go right now, and probably not very interesting, or it would not bring a lot of clarity to go through the details of the code itself. Rather, I will really insist on some points that are specifically important for geothermal projects. There will be a little bit of a complement to Hugo's presentation, which was already very good in highlighting what was important to consider in the application. So typically, I mean, the general reminder, but it's always good to keep in mind because it's very fast approaching, only basically a month left. But the deadline for application is 3rd of March 2022. I have included the link here to access the call document. So this you will be able to access as well. We will upload the presentation on the event page. And anyway, it is quite easy to find as well online. As Hugo mentioned, it's very, very important to comply with the framework available on the web platform, also on all the methodology requirements, etc. So really, I mean, it's a little bit of an obvious step, but the first step in our application is really to go into a lot of details into the core requirements in terms of methodology, in terms of all the categories required, and to really comply as much as possible. I'm not going to go over the budget, but probably we will see more projects financed, and this would be especially interesting for geothermal, because as we've seen in the discussion a bit earlier, basically the first largest projects, basically, which had quite a high grade already, kind of took up all the available financing. So hopefully with a larger total pool, smaller projects in absolute terms, like typically geothermal projects, will maybe be able to better access financing. Quite relevant also for geothermal, and here I'm thinking especially if you are looking to implement things like geothermal heat pump projects, etc. It might not fall into the Annex A category of geothermal energy, and might more be something like the use of renewable energy outside the Annex 1, sorry, of the ETS. So typically a rough measure, if I'm not mistaken, is if it's more than 3 megawatts thermal output, you are in the Annex 1, and if not, you are not. So that's always good to keep in mind, for instance, for projects that might be looking at scaling up a given smaller technology. Then one other point here, you have the breakdown of the various categories and sector to comply with. So this is always good also to keep in mind when preparing an application. So typically geothermal is its own sector, and then you have to identify whether you're providing in terms of services, electricity, heating, or cooling. So yeah, in terms of emission, I'm going to repeat that it's quite important to be respecting the methodology, justifying all assumptions. Then other benefits of the project, from what I understand, maybe if you go, you can correct me if I'm wrong, can also be somewhat accounted for in the grading, although it will not be as central as the absolute and relative GHG savings. Typically things like the production of renewable energy, the supply of energy storage, etc., can be valued, but the absolute measure of the emission of the project is going to be the greenhouse gases emissions. Now really to brush a little bit on the topic of project maturity specifically for geothermal. We have some specificities in the geothermal sector, which are notably linked to the question of the geothermal risk, and especially for heat projects to the uncertainty in being able to supply the energy. As Bodo mentioned, you need typically to have some form of contract, PPA or else, but something where you are sure you are going to be able to sell your energy. In absolute terms, the PPA part is not a big issue, except that when you are on the heat sector, well, if you are doing your project and you don't have infrastructure, it might be an issue, so you need a partner to build that up. And this can be a thread, so this really needs to be well integrated into the financial modeling of the projects to really show that there is a plan to secure the income on the projects online. So typically something like a letter of support or some form of agreement to have the heat, for instance, bought, etc. But more importantly, for geothermal projects, very often there is the issue of the geothermal resource risk, and here it's very important to also emphasize how this risk is going to be integrated, and integrate that as part of the financial model, but really to reflect, to reflect what contingencies are being taken to ensure the risk is not an issue to the profitability. The Innovation Fund grant, as you mentioned, can be disbursed on a milestone basis and can also contribute to things like the geothermal drilling. So it can, for instance, help with something like reducing the cost of financing, because you do not need to borrow. You don't need to have private financing, for instance, to finance the drilling. But it is not in itself reducing the level of risk. So here, being able to access something like a geothermal risk mitigation scheme can be quite important. This is all for this very short overview. I think most of the relevant points for the second call were already discussed during the rest of the discussion, but what I would invite you all to do is, in case you have some specific question about the application procedure, about the content of the call, the way your project qualifies, etc., don't hesitate to reach out to us, the Ajak team, and we'll do what we can to accompany you or to point you to the right people who could give you the right feedback. Thank you all.
Thank you, Thomas. And indeed, you, Thomas, are the contact person in Ajak for the Innovation Fund. So participants, any question you may have, contact Thomas. And now to conclude our event, we give the floor to Sandeep Kumar, our Ajak Head of Policy, for bringing some recommendation as an expert on the Climate Fund, ETS, and Innovation Fund.
Excellent. Thank you, Philippe, and thank you to all the previous speakers. This is a fascinating conversation. There's so much rich information here, and I really hope we can get more geothermal projects through the Innovation Fund. Okay, so just to kind of give everyone a bit of a recap, the first half of this, or the first 2/3 of this discussion, have been around the actual project application process. Now, all of the kind of perimeters that we have in the Innovation Fund, they've been set out in law. That law is the European Emissions Trading System, or the ETS for short. And lo and behold, that directive or that piece of legislation is currently being revised again. So we have an opportunity over the next 2 years to see if we can build enough momentum to potentially make some changes in the core legal text, which is then filtered down into all the kind of project guidance that Ugo was talking about later on, to kind of better bring out geothermal through some kind of a requirement. Now, what I've got in front of you is quite boring text. You don't have to sit down and read this inside out, but what it tells you is the nuts and bolts of what the Innovation Fund is. So originally, it was the NER 300, I'm sure you're familiar with, and its original aim was to focus on financing carbon capture and carbon capture and storage projects. It later became utilization projects as well. Eventually, through the legislative process, innovative renewables were added in, and the focus was principally then extended in the last reform of the emissions trading system in 2017-18 to include industrial process emissions. Of course, industrial process emissions are largely different temperature grades and loads for heat. So that's another opportunity where potentially down the road, geothermal can be looking at its applications in, low to medium temperature heat range load provision, such as, sectors such as paper and pulp, chemicals, different chemical processes or sub-processes. All of these kind of things that I think will evolve over time, but certainly something that we need to be looking at as a community. Now, let's go through the key bits of text here. As you can see from the first section highlighted in yellow, this is really the focus is on projects which have widespread application. Geothermal has the widest spread of application you could possibly have. Bearing in mind that it addresses both power and electricity, and of course.
Maybe Sanjeev, just you are not sharing your screen actually.
Am I not sharing my screen? Oh, okay. I thought I was sharing my screen. I'm so sorry. Okay, well, what have I done? What have I done wrong? My screen is brilliant at the moment. What am I doing wrong? Oh, okay. Now I can share my screen. Et voila. Okay. Apologies for that. I feel very, very silly. But okay, voila. You can see my screen now. You'll have my slide. There's only these are kind of just as an aid memoir rather than a kind of full of the richness of the detail that you've had before. So the second part is to focus on technologies which are not commercially or yet to be commercially available, but are breakthrough solutions. And this is really the space where geothermal sits quite well without being mentioned. And of course, here you have the threshold for 60% projects and the 40% on the verification of the avoided emission. So you can see how all of the rules that you as a project developer are focusing on were written in law 5, 6, 7 years ago, and give us a chance to reach ourselves. And this is really the main slide I want to talk to you about. So we have an opportunity here to look at the award criteria and see if we can find ways to program this into the core principle legislation or any of the kind of supporting documentation that comes from that. So of the 4 criteria, Ugo went through this one. Our other colleagues who kind of gave you the various project examples, they've gone through all of the 4 main criteria for awarding a project. And really, one of the things that we've noticed is, and it's clearly an area where we can try and think about some form of legislative tweak, is the fact that when it comes to kind of degrees of innovation, it seems to be focused principally on renewable electricity, less so on heating and cooling. And one way in which you can find language to bring out the renewable heating and cooling, again, puts geothermal in a stronger place without necessarily using the words geothermal. The second option is actually to go back to the legal text, and where it mentions carbon capture and storage and industrial processes and innovative renewables, to also add in the word geothermal and its kind of various applications. That's a possibility. It's not necessarily something that we've kind of written any text around, but it's certainly something we can play with. This is a point that Philippe has already mentioned around the capex thresholds. We kind of have a very binary, small scale, large scale, and perhaps there's a need to have something that's a bit more medium scale to, again, ensure that funding is adequately divided out, but also to give geothermal projects a better stab at whatever is left in terms of the funding pot. And then also another option, which is to look at kind of much more detailed subcategories. For example, should there be subcategory in terms of renewable heating, in terms of innovative renewables for heating, innovative renewables for cooling, innovative renewables for local authorities, locally sourced innovative renewables, all sorts of different ways in which we can kind of break down the pie, but create much more dedicated or much more accessible funding streams for geothermal. So these are just some ideas that I wanted to throw onto the table. And if you do have any kind of ideas in terms of the legal side of things, the way in which you can restructure or tweak the existing scheme so that when it becomes effective, which will be in maybe 5 or 6 years time down the road, then please do get in touch with me. My contact details are here, and I look forward to helping you to ensure that we kind of make the most of the opportunities that we have with the legislative file. As a reminder, for those who are not familiar, the legislation is going to be open for about a year and a half. So we're expecting the kind of big political decisions to be made by December, January, February next year. But in terms of actually getting the idea down and writing the text, we've really only got 1 month to do that. The deadline is the 15th of March in the European Parliament. So if you have ideas, or if you want to talk about ideas, please get in touch with me. My email address and phone number are available. I'm really looking forward to engaging with you and ensuring that you are successful project developers, because this is how the geothermal decade grows. We desperately need to have the Innovation Fund pointing towards geothermal much more stronger than it has been before, and we can only do that if we work together. So those are my points. And Thomas, I can hand back over to you. Unless, of course, there are any questions. Oops.
Yes, indeed. Maybe we can open the floor for last question. Just to inform all of you, indeed, you put some questions in the chat. We were not able to answer to all of them, but we took note of them, and we will try to answer them or we will forward them to Hugo and the European Commission to answer them. I think now it's time to conclude this event. I thank you all presenters, participants for this first Ajak event this year on the lessons learned from the Innovation Fund first call in order to prepare the second call. You will see soon we will organize other events to promote geothermal, concluding a great year, not concluding, but with a great event this year, of course, the European Geothermal Congress. We all welcome you in Berlin in October. I thank you all, wish you a good day, and hope to see you soon in the next Ajak event. Have a good day. Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.